You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Happy Saturday, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI, and today we're going to talk a little bit about technology. You know, from being able to print gadgets and novelty items to now printing automotive and aviation parts with a printer. The 3D printing industry has grown in tremendous ways over the past 3 decades. Companies can use 3D printers to make specific parts, tools, or products that they used to traditionally outsource to manufacturing plants, many of which were previously overseas. Our guest today is William Llewellyn. He is the Director of Operations for MTech 3D, a Knoxville-based company at the forefront of 3D printing technology. He has worked in the industry since 2007, so 15 years, overseeing operations and maintenance of a variety of 3D printers. Good morning, William. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about your... Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the 3D printing world.
Yeah, so rewind about 15 years ago, I just got out of a 4-year tour with the Marine Corps, and I went through college for mechanical engineering, but I really didn't know what I wanted to apply that to. So I actually answered a Craigslist ad while I was out in Los Angeles for a model maker at the time, and I had no idea going into it what it would be. So I figured I would be making little model ships and throwing them in a bottle and be on a production line. But what it wound up being was a 3D printing service bureau. And basically it was a small company in Los Angeles where we had 4 or 5 3D printers, and companies would send us their files, their designs, and we would 3D print them for those customers and either hand paint them or not, or do various other things to these models and then deliver them to the customer. So that kind of started out. I started out sanding models, model making, sweeping the floors, and then that graduated to running machines and programming, and then that graduated to overseeing sales and doing trade shows. And so it just kind of grew and grew exponentially over time. The more I involved myself with it, and actually, it's a labor of love, because I've been building models since I was a small child. And so the more I got into this 3D printing industry, I just fell in love with it, and that's why I'm still with it today.
That's great. Let's back up for a second. You said you served in the Marine Corps for 4 years.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service. Did
sir.
you do that out of college, before college? Tell us a little bit about your experience in the Marine Corps.
When I graduated high school, this was around 2000, 2001, and the mentality in high school guidance counselors at the time was to push everyone to college right away, right out of college. And for me, there was so much going on in my mind, I really didn't know what I wanted to do exactly. And I've had some family members that were in the Marine Corps, and that was part of the motivation. But I was actually registering for a new high school senior year, and a Marine Corps recruiter walked in, and it just hit me all of a sudden. And he walked in. I said, I'm going to be a Marine, and he said, "Oh, really?" and so that just kind of started from there. And I didn't know what I wanted to do right away, so I figured the Marine Corps would give me a chance to go see the world a little bit. And I knew there were benefits involved with it, like VA home loans and VA educational, but that really wasn't at the forefront of my mind at the time. Really, I just wanted to kind of get out and see the world and figure out a little bit of who I am at the time. And so that was a great thing for me to do. And I actually went to college after the Marine Corps and used my GI Bill.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. My father used the GI Bill to go to college. He did the Navy. Of course, that was a long time ago. But anyway, thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.
Let's get into the 3D technology. The process of 3D printing, I think, William, is unfamiliar to a lot of our listeners. So, what is 3D printing? How does it work? What does a 3D printer look like? I guess depending on what they're designed to print, they could look completely different from one to the next. Is that right?
Correct. So to give a brief history of 3D printing, it really kind of culminated in the early 1980s. Computer-aided drafting was kind of a new technology at the time, and it was up and coming. And there were quite a few people who were jumping on this computer-aided drafting kind of bandwagon at the time. There were two technologies that really emerged in the beginning of the 1980s. One of those was called laminated object manufacturing. And whether this one was the first or not, I think it's a kind of a small argument between this and there's another technology called stereolithography. But laminated object manufacturing is basically a machine that will roll out paper with some adhesive on it, and it will roll out a layer of paper, and a laser will come through and trim this paper out to basically a cross section of a shape, almost like an MRI does with a scan, where you have a cross section of an object. And it would continue to layer these rolls of paper over and over and over again until it finally created an object that you could hold in your hand that was based off of this computer aided drafting model, in essence. Or basically, let's just, for all intents and purposes, let's call it a 3D JPEG. And then, so another technology that was around the time, there was a man by the name of Chuck Hull. And in 1984, I believe, he patented the stereolithography process. Now, this process is a little bit more advanced, and it took off quite a bit more than the laminated object manufacturing. So basically what Chuck did was he took a vat of liquid resin that anytime UV light hits this resin, it changes from a liquid to a solid. And so what Chuck did was he basically took some of the idea with the laminated object manufacturing with the laser, but combined it with this UV sensitive resin. And basically they point this laser at this vat of resin, and wherever that laser hits, because it has a UV light in it, it solidifies from a liquid to a solid. It basically almost instantly. Sometimes it might take a couple seconds more to fully cure out, but Chuck basically invented this method and kind of honed it in the early 80s of stereolithography. And then later on in the later 80s, there was another process called fused deposition modeling from the Stratasys company that kind of came out as well. Now that's probably a little bit more familiar to everyone, where you have a spool of plastic. It almost looks like a lot of people call it weed eater line, and it can look like that. But it's basically a spool of plastic. It could be ABS, it could be PLA, nylon. That sky's kind of the limit. And so they feed this plastic into basically a heated extruder, and to kind of boil it down, it's almost like a hot glue gun. It basically, you push this hot plastic through this heated tip, and it will go around and basically build a layer, one layer at a time, until you have a model. Now, going through the 90s, the early 2000s, and even up to current day, There are so many different technologies on how to do this process, and there are other materials, there are other machines that do the same thing but just in a different way. Some are faster, some have this added benefit, some don't, and so the market is massive compared to where it began in the 1980s. Um, Mostly
Yeah,
plastic.
when I heard about 3D printing the first time, seems like it was probably, man, I mean, it was probably 10, 12, maybe even 15 years ago.
Hmm.
And at the time, I thought, when I heard about it, I thought, wow, that's wild. I'd never heard of it before. I was at a conference and they had a speaker and they were talking about how it could be applied in the future. And I thought at the time it was a pretty new thing, but you're telling us that it actually goes back and was birthed in the early 80s. And then it just, I guess it was, as you've discussed, it was very rudimentary then compared to where it is now.
Correct.
What type, give us an idea of the varied types of things you can make with a 3D printer.
Well, many people ask me that, and really, at the end of the day, if you can imagine it in your mind and create it in a digital, computer-aided drafting software, really you can create it. And many times people ask me, well, what kind of things do you 3D print? And it's that's kind of a loaded question in itself, because really you can take a look at any object today that you interact with, and for the most part, 3D printing has had a hand in just about everything. For instance, I have a tape measure on my desk that I use daily to measure boxes when we ship and things like that. And looking at it right now, I guarantee you that this was initially created with 3D printing at one time to create the initial design and to make sure everything works. Now, when you get into what can you make with this, uh, you have to realize that the sky's the limit, because you have an object that you can 3D print it, but then you can take that object and then you can, let's say, put it in a silicone mold, and then you can replicate that same object over and over and over again. Or you can put it in a box with some sand and pack that sand around that object, and then remove the object and pour metal in that, and then next thing you know, you have a metal casting. We have even done applications where we 3D print either a wax or a plastic that will melt away. And people will basically put a slurry around this object and then melt it out and pour metal into that. And they call that investment casting. And so, 3D printing can be used as either just an object to look at your hand. It can be used as a master pattern for production, mass quantities. And then also here in the recent years, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but it's kind of evolved into production in itself, which is something I've always wanted to happen, but that's kind of more recently become more of a reality due to the circumstances in the world around us. But as far as what you can do with it, really, with today's materials and the new technologies, you can really if you can imagine it, you can make it, and that's the beauty of 3D printing in today's world. Because as a kid, you imagine things, and you think, oh well, if I could do this, well, now you have the ability to do that. And with other technologies such as 3D scanning, digital sculpting, robotic manufacturing lines, the applications are just endless with 3D printing.
We're visiting this morning with William Llewellyn. He is with MTech 3D, and we're talking about the application of 3D printing. And when we get back from our first break and later in the show, we're going to get a little bit more into what are the implications moving forward? How might it continue to evolve in the manufacturing world? What does that mean for you and me? And what are some of the cool things that we can do with 3D printers? So stay with us. You're listening to More Living with Jim Brogan, only on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back. This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm your host, Jim Brogan. We're visiting with William Llewellyn, talking about 3D printing. Do check us out on our website, broganfinancial.com. We got lots of resources there. I do want to mention that this Thursday we are doing a blood drive in partner with Medic. A very, very worthy cause. We'll have it all day, 9 to 4, in our parking lot at Brogan Financial. And that location is, if you know where Sam's Club is in West Knoxville, we are right across the street from the gas pumps at Sam's. There are two buildings there called Onyx Point, and we're having that blood drive this Thursday, 9 to 4. Always is good to give blood, and I know the blood banks need it very, very badly. As I mentioned, we're visiting with William Llewellyn. He is the Director of Operations of Intech 3D, and we're talking about the implications of 3D printing, trying to get a little bit better understanding of 3D printing. William, what is the largest thing that's ever been printed by a 3D printer?
Well, again, that's a loaded question. There is a company called
I didn't know that was a loaded question.
Well, there is a company out of Minnesota called Stratasys, and they have a printer, what's called the Infinite printer. And basically, as long as there is material loaded in the machine, it will continue to print, and basically it moves along a line. And what the largest thing they've printed, I have no idea. But locally, in the past, there was a lot of a hubbub around the area. When the company Local Motors, they're no longer in business at this time, but Local Motors gained a lot of notoriety dealing with ORNL at the time, when they created a 3D printer that would print a car all at once. And they actually produced quite a few of these little 3D printed, basically it's a car and the frame and chassis and everything all together. And they would put an electric motor in it and drive it around. And they went into production making some buses, but I believe that at this point in time they're out of business for whatever reason. But
so if you think of a car, of the different components, I mean, can one printer do various types of jobs, or do you have to? Each printer has one thing that it can do.
In the early days, it was more each printer had its own special ability. But with technology advancing, we're able to do multiple materials in the same build and multiple colors, full color. So one of the keys of 3D printing that has really advanced it is what we call support technology. When you 3D print an object layer by layer, you start off at the bottom or upside down, work your way down, whichever, it doesn't matter. You get to certain points in certain objects where you may have a section of the object over here on one side of the build tray and one on the other, and you have to have something to hold this down to your machine while it's printing. And that's what we call support technology, and that can vary in many ways, but basically it's another material that is printed at the same time that you either break away, wash away, melt away, dissolve. There's so many other ways to remove this support material, but basically it's like a jig or a fixture, and it holds this object in place while you're building the model, and then you remove it afterwards, and they call it post-processing. So that has advanced the things you can print over the years, and the complexity of models. And so with the added benefit of adding multiple materials to the same build, you can kind of eliminate many different facets of objects and kind of blend them into one. for example, most of the toothbrushes we all pick up today, if you look at them, they have a rigid plastic, and then they have kind of like a rubber part of the grip or whatever, and that's called overmolding. And basically in the past they would make a mold, they would make the hard plastic, throw it back in another mold, and then they would shoot the rubber over it. Well, now with some 3D printing technologies, you can 3D print the rigid and the rubber at the same time. So you eliminate a lot of steps with this new technology, and so a lot of these complexities wind up getting kind of washed down because you can eliminate a lot of these extra processes. And a great example of that in modern times is GE. They're manufacturing rocket engines in one piece, where before they were, who knows, 300 pieces or more.
So, practically speaking, it sounds like you've used the word model a lot, making molds. The word that comes to mind is prototype. Is it mainly being used to create prototypes that then can be used to go into a more of a manufacturing process, or where do you see this going? Do you see it where it could be a quantity thing too, and could be a different way to actually manufacture on a mass scale?
Well, Jim, when I first started out 15 years ago, the rule of thumb really in the industry was you 3D printed 3 of everything. At the time, it was very common to do this. You would 3D print one as a master pattern for molds. You would 3D print another for master pattern for paint. Basically, the painters would look at that as a master pattern, and then you'd print one as a kind of like a marketing piece, so that you could take pictures of it while it's getting manufactured. You would keep the one, and you would send the other 2 to China to get mass produced. And that was really, I saw it more times than not, that was the case of how people manufactured items or goods. But fast forward to 2020, almost everything got flipped over upside down. And so one of the things that I started noticing was that people started coming to us to mass produce objects that they couldn't get otherwise. One of the first clients that we had, they had ordered 5,000 parts of these little tiny plastic pieces that had to go in their product. And at the time, they had no clue when they would get it back from China. They had no, they were looking at 6 months or more to even get these back, and so their product would have been delayed that far. So what we did was we took their computer-aided drafting design and basically 3D printed 5,000 of these little plastic pieces, and we had them supplied and ready to go in under 2 weeks. So
see, it sounds to me like there's implications of how this evolves.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, don't get me wrong. I still have customers locally that they'll want to 3D print one to make sure it works. But
sure.
Really, there's again, the sky's the limit. If you need 5,000 of them, we could do that as well.
We're visiting with William Llewellyn. He's with MTech 3D. We're talking about 3D printing. When we come back, we're going to have more. I'm going to ask him, can you actually print a human organ with a 3D printer? That'll be a very fascinating discussion. We're also going to have our dollars and cents segment. Inflation and stock market volatility. How is it affecting your money now? And maybe just as importantly, can we expect from our investments over the coming years? So stay with us. This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. We're with you every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m., and again 3 to 4 p.m., right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. You can also catch all of our shows on our website. We podcast them. Go to broganfinancial.com and click on radio. You can also go to YouTube and hear them there. We also have our dollars and cents segments on our website podcasted. We got lots of resources. We are having a blood drive on this Thursday in partnership with Medic. Very, very important needs for the blood banks. It's 9 to 4 all day at our office in the back parking lot. We're right across the street from the gas pumps at Sam's at Onyx Point, right off of Walker Springs. We'd love to see you there. We're talking about 3D printing and the implications, learning a little bit about how the technology works, and then what can we expect moving forward. Before we get back to our guest, William Llewellyn, however, it is time for Dollars and Cents.
Want to be sure you are getting the most out of your retirement? For all the years of your retirement? That's the primary goal of More Living with Jim Brogan and our Dollars and Cents segment, where we provide you with an important financial tip that will help positively impact the quality of your life in retirement. And now, here's Jim with this week's Dollars and Cents tip.
Inflation and the stock market. And what are the implications for you and your investment and, more importantly, financial plan? The new inflation number for May came out yesterday, 8.6% year over year, 40-year high. Market cratered, went down over 2.5% in one day. That is quite volatile. What do we make of all this? I think it's very important to understand, first off, that in the short term, the stock market is completely unpredictable and volatile. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and we can go from stable markets to volatile markets with the snap of your fingers. In the long term, market fundamentals typically rue the day. And it's important to understand that for several reasons. One, stock market and risk investments in general, diversified market investments that aren't just in stocks but are in a variety of different things. That type of market investing is, one of the keys is how long is it going to be? What's your time horizon before you need to touch that money? Because in the short term, we have no idea. So we need time for things to kind of work out in the long term with market fundamentals. In the short term, I've found that over the last 20 years, certainly 15 years, macroeconomic factors impact the market the most, but in the longer term, market fundamentals typically will win out. So let's talk about market fundamentals. Coming into the year, it's important to realize where we've been over the 3 years leading into 2022. So this is 2019, the pandemic year of 2020, and 2021. The S&P 500 was up over 25% per year annualized. And we had really very, very high valuations of stocks in the United States. Well, that creates a euphoria as an investor. And we just want more and more and more. There's no way we can maintain, historically, would tell us there's no way we can maintain that type of a return. So what's happened this year is market valuations, in other words, how expensive are stocks? We started out the year with market valuations very high. We're now getting closer to historic averages. We're not there yet. We're still a little bit high. But a lot of this, we could argue, is simply market valuations coming down. So when we look at what's going on in the stock market right now, the market is still in the green if you go back to even January of 2021. Just a little over, almost a year and a half ago. And you could almost say that in the last 3 years, as valuations grew, investors were just borrowing returns from the future. And at some point, those things average out because market fundamentals have to win. Now, the areas that have been hit the hardest are the areas in the last 3 years that grew the most. Growth stocks, technology stocks have been, as a rule, hit the hardest. They also had the highest valuations, made the most amount of money the last 3 years. So now they've been hit harder because, again, it's this idea of borrowing returns from the future. So what does this really mean? Well, inflation is here, and it's going to be here for a while. We don't know how it's going to all play out. The market is reacting very negatively to the potential impact of inflation on the economy. And with the Fed's statements that they're going to aggressively raise interest rates, continue to, and how that affects economic growth and slows down the economy. That's what the market's reacting to. And I think until we see until we get a sense that we've hit peak inflation and inflation is slowing, is going back the other way, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of volatility. But remember, we shouldn't be in risk investments for the short term. We should be in those for a longer term, and I'll say 5 to 7 years. So there's a couple of keys here. One is to have short-term holdings for cash needs and for short-term income that are not dependent on the stock market and not dependent on risk investments. And in the market, that way the money you do have invested for market growth, you're not worried about the next 6 months or year. You're worried about 5, 6 years from now. Because over time, market fundamentals, at least historically, have won. And so things average out, in other words. But I do think we also need to look at the reality that for the last 15 years, from the fall of 2007 when we had the real estate crash to now, we've had massive government stimulus. There is just an enormous amount of money that's been flooded into the economy, both by Congress and the Federal Reserve. And that can't happen the next 10 years. So the Fed is starting to bring back money supply, called quantitative tightening. They're raising interest rates. They're not going to be flooding the market with cash anymore. I just don't see how they can continue to do that like they have the last 15 years. So we might need to mute our expectations of market returns over the coming years. However, market investing is the best way to beat inflation long term. The key is more diversification, not just stocks, but having other types of non-traditional things like real estate and commodities and natural resources and energy. You have more things in your portfolio that if one thing zigs, another thing zags. Because in a volatile, choppy, sideways market, if you can reduce volatility overall, history would tell us you can maybe even do better than the market over periods of time with a good bit less risk. So secure income for the short term, create greater diversification for the long term.
That's our Dollars and Cents segment for this week. You can find this week's Dollars and Cents segment and others by visiting BroganFinancial.com.
And at BroganFinancial.com, you can get all of our podcasts of our show and our Dollars and Cents segment. Go to BroganFinancial.com and click on radio. Today we're talking about 3D printing and the implications. How does it work? Where is it going? We're visiting with William Llewellyn. He is Director of Operations for MTech 3D here in Knoxville. Are there any limitations, William, when it comes? I mean, we've seen jewelry, automotive parts, aviation parts can be 3D printed. Are there limitations? Are there things, that we really haven't been able, nuts we have not been able to crack?
At this point in time, I think everything's been tried. Now, there are some technologies that haven't really been perfected yet. Given, I mentioned Chuck Hull and the Stratasys FDM from the 80s. Those technologies have had 20, 30 years to really develop their technology and kind of hone it into where it's a user-friendly interface and reliable. However, a lot of these newer technologies that use materials that per se are not out there on the market yet, they need some more polishing per se. Even metal 3D printing, it's out there. Consumers can buy these printers, but there's still kind of a handful to post-process, and the material cost is fairly high. Even the printer cost is fairly high. So yes, we've kind of touched every material and process out there, but eventually we want to get to a printer that will print metal, plastic, rubber, all at one time. And so that there is no printer out there that will do everything all at once. But that's kind of what the end goal is, to where it can really do everything all at once.
William, we need to get to our last break. When we come back, I am going to ask you, can we print a human organ? And what are the practical applications moving forward? So stay with us. We're visiting with William Llewellyn and talking about 3D printing. He is with MTech 3D. This is More Living with Jim Brogan on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Thanks for tuning in this weekend to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. We're with you every Saturday 9 to 10 a.m. and again 3 to 4 p.m. We're having a blood drive Thursday at our office in the parking lot from 9 to 4 in partnership with Medic. We hope you'll come by. We're right across from the gas pumps at Sam's. Also on Thursday, I will be filling in for Bob Yarbrough from 10 to 12. I would love for you to join us and listening to that show. I'll have on Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs from 10 to 11 to talk about Knox County. And then 11 to 12, I'll be visiting with David Wagner, who is a chartered financial analyst, investment fund manager, portfolio manager, and we're going to talk about inflation, the economy, and your money. Today on the show, we're talking with William Llewellyn, and we're talking about 3D printing. William, is it possible to print a human organ with a 3D printer? And if so,
Yes.
what material do you use for that? How can you print something that's living? How can you print something that is living?
Well, when you 3D print what we call bioplotting, initially you're 3D printing with basically skin cells, and these are generic skin cells. A lot of times they're grown in labs, and it's basically a generic material, a biomaterial, and these are 3D printed on what we call a 3D bioplotter. EnvisionTech is one of the companies that kind of got into this in the early 2000s. But basically, they 3D print this model just like we would a plastic model or something else, but it's made out of generic skin cells that were grown. And before these organs, tissue, whatever they 3D print is actually transplanted onto a human being, they take this, what they call a scaffold after it's 3D printing, and they kind of immerse it with DNA from the recipient. So that improves adhesion, improves that there's no infection when they attach it. And so this is kind of, it's still in a lot of trial stage and university kind of realm. As with any kind of healthcare technology, it's something that really needs to be tried over time to make sure that it's completely safe for its intended use. Now,
so basically, you have to start with a living cell, but then you can actually use that to print another living thing. That
correct,
seems crazy
correct.
to me. Yeah, the future application of that could be dramatic.
It is.
Like.
It is. For instance, I use the example a lot of times. If everybody was either 3D scanned or had a a CAT scan or had a digital scan or sculpt of even their face, that would be on record for however long it needed to be. And if that person had to have a complete, let's say we had a burn victim that lost, most of their facial features. In theory, you could go back to that scan of, let's say, 5 years ago, 3D print out basically basically that skin or that organ and dilute it with the DNA of the recipient and attach it. So the kind of the realm of possibility is out there.
Medical technology and innovation could really be a driver of economic growth in the future. Let's talk about the economy. Can 3D printing be a good economic engine and create jobs and even fill manufacturing needs?
Definitely. I will say this. I've been in 3D printing for the past 15 years. You know, I was even in it when the 2008, 2009 hit, you know, and it changed the world. And then even with 2020, you know, through even those tough times, I found that 3D printing was a very stable market. Now, the key with 3D printing is that if you see a market start to, let's say, dry up, for instance, 2008, 2009, the automotive industry was one of our largest customers at the time, and then basically overnight they were not. And the trick was, you know, to really change your direction of where you're looking for your customers and the market drive. And really that's the beauty of 3D printing, is that you can adapt to whatever market you need to. And that's why I feel that it's a very stable place to be for the future. And even you know, in 2020, when a lot of stocks started to take a huge dive, I noticed some of the 3D printing stocks kind of stabilized, and some of them actually even increased in value in certain areas because they were fairly stable. And some of those were CAD, you know.
William, we're about out of time. How can people learn more about 3D printing at MTech 3D, your company?
Yes, sir. www.mtech3d.com. We're a Knoxville-based company. We do everything from small individual 3D printing to mass production.
If somebody wants to get started with 3D printing at home, where would you recommend they get started?
You know, YouTube's a good place to kind of get your feet wet with the realities of 3D printing. There are many channels out there on YouTube to kind of just see how the process goes. I don't want to name any off the top of my head to give any leniency towards anyone, but just there are also websites dedicated to simply the learning of 3D printing.
William Llewellyn, Director of Operations for MTech 3D. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you, Jim.
That's William Llewellyn. You can check him out at mtech3d.com. As we've discussed, the many different technological, medical, innovative, and even manufacturing implications long-term of 3D technology. It's pretty fascinating. If you've missed part of the show, we're here every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m., again, 3 to 4 p.m. You can also catch our podcasts online. Go to broganfinancial.com, click on radio. Next week, we will have on Doug Lawyer with and we're going to be talking about Knoxville economic development in 2022. We are having a blood drive this Thursday in the Brogan Financial parking lot in partnership with Medic. We hope we'll see you there 9 to 4. And thank you for tuning in this week. We've discussed really future technology for greater economy and greater health care even, so you can live the best years of your life your way. Thank you, Chris, for engineering the show. Thank you to Jill for helping produce the show. This is More Living with Jim Brogan, only on the News and Talk of East Tennessee, News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Have a very blessed weekend, and go Tennessee Vol baseball team.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.